They ask why the United Nations and ECOWAS are storming Burkina Faso, and the question lingers in the air like smoke after fire. It is a question that hides in whispers and echoes in villages and cities alike. What threat does this land pose? What danger does a sovereign people trying to reclaim dignity pose to such mighty institutions? For years our people have suffered, not just from bullets or bombs, but from the silence of those who claim to protect humanity. The cries of children orphaned by terror fell on deaf ears. The soil, soaked in the blood of the innocent, bore witness to a global system that values minerals over lives, control over cooperation, and now, when a new path is taken, one that rejects puppetry and demands self-determination, they arrive. With condemnation in one hand and veiled threats in the other, they cloak their intentions in words like democracy and stability. But we know the pattern. We have seen it before in other lands. Sanctions dressed as diplomacy, interventions dressed as concern. They do not come when the villages burn. They do not come when the villages burn. They come when the people rise. If their concern were true, they would have come long ago, when terror was a daily companion and the skies were filled with drones, not rain. But now when we say enough, when we choose to define our destiny, suddenly the world remembers our name. There is a silence, yes, but it is not weakness. It is the silence of watchfulness, of strength gathering like a storm. It is the silence of a people who will speak not only with words, but with action. Let it be clear, the will of a free people is not up for negotiation. We will not trade our land, our values, or our children's future for approval from distant halls of power. Let them ask why again, and we will answer, not in press conferences or polished reports, but in the steadfast refusal to bow. We are not begging for recognition. We are reclaiming what is already ours. Let history judge who stood with the people and who stood in their way. The recent involvement of the United Nations and ECOWAS in Burkina Faso has raised a critical question that cannot be ignored. Why now? For years, Burkina Faso has endured suffering at the hands of violent extremist groups, with communities destroyed, lives lost, and families displaced. Villages were burned to the ground, children forced into orphanhood, and entire regions left to fend for themselves. During these long years of hardship, the voices of international organizations remained notably silent. Aid came late, if at all. Resolutions were passed, but no decisive action followed. Appeals were made, but with little urgency. This silence has not been forgotten, and it forms the foundation of the deep suspicion now surrounding their sudden interest. The people of Burkina Faso have not forgotten who stood with them in the darkest hours and who did not. When international organizations like the UN and ECOWAS failed to respond swiftly to the deteriorating security situation, they lost credibility in the eyes of many citizens. Now that the people are asserting their right to choose a new path, one that emphasizes sovereignty, dignity, and independence, these same bodies are suddenly vocal and present. The timing of their concern raises eyebrows, and the sincerity of their motives is rightfully questioned. It appears that the international response is not driven by humanitarian concern or solidarity with the people, but by geopolitical calculations. When foreign interests in Burkina Faso's natural resources and regional influence are potentially threatened, we suddenly see statements, sanctions, and visits. There was no such urgency when innocent civilians were slaughtered in broad daylight, when thousands were internally displaced, or when schools and hospitals were shut down due to insecurity. The selective application of international attention speaks volumes about whose lives and suffering truly matter to these institutions. Moreover, the language used by international actors is telling. They speak of restoring order, preserving democracy, and maintaining stability. Yet none of these ideals were actively pursued when foreign-backed regimes allowed the country to descend into chaos. Where were these guardians of democracy when previous administrations failed to protect their citizens? Where was the UN when entire regions were abandoned to terrorist control? The sudden commitment to democratic principles seems to emerge only when there is a threat to the status quo that serves external powers. This pattern is not new. Across Africa, and indeed much of the global South, interventions under the banner of peace and development often conceal deeper agendas. They come cloaked in noble rhetoric, but frequently result in the reinforcement of foreign dominance, the weakening of local leadership, and the disruption of grassroots movements for change. Burkina Faso is not an isolated case. It is part of a larger story of resistance against a world order that has too often prioritized control over genuine cooperation. The question then is not just why the UN and ECOWAS are involved now, but who truly benefits from their involvement. Is it the people in the displaced camps, the farmers unable to till their land, the youth searching for opportunity? Or is it foreign corporations seeking access to resources and political elites maintaining regional influence under the protection of these institutions? This question lies at the heart of the current tension, and it must be answered with honesty and clarity. Burkina Faso's path forward is not perfect, and challenges remain immense, but the people's decision to chart their own course should be met with respect, not interference. Their desire to redefine what sovereignty means in practice, not as a slogan, but as a lived reality, deserves space and support, not threats and pressure. International bodies must understand that legitimacy cannot be imposed from outside. It is earned through trust, consistency, and the will of the people. The presence of UN and ECOWAS forces at this moment in time, after years of silence and inaction, feels less like support and more like an attempt to regain lost influence. Burkina Faso is asking questions not out of paranoia, but from a place of historical memory. The world should listen carefully to those questions. They are not just directed at institutions, but at a global order that has too often failed those who needed it most. If the international community wishes to be seen as a partner rather than a patron, it must first reckon with its past silence and answer truthfully why it chooses to speak now. For years, the people of Burkina Faso endured unimaginable suffering. Waves of violence swept across the nation, with terrorist attacks devastating towns and villages, claiming thousands of lives and displacing entire communities. Markets were bombed, schools were shut down, and roads became death traps. Families were torn apart, livelihoods destroyed, and an entire generation grew up under the constant shadow of fear. Amidst this chaos, the population cried out for help, not in whispers but in full voice. And yet, those cries were met with silence from the very institutions that claim to protect peace, uphold human rights, and stand with the vulnerable. The United Nations and ECOWAS, institutions with the means, the mandate, and the global reach to intervene in defense of innocent lives, did little. Statements of concern were issued from air-conditioned offices in faraway cities, but no meaningful action followed. Condemnations were drafted, meetings were held, and press conferences delivered, but for the people on the ground, nothing changed. As villages burned and terror spread, these institutions watched from a distance, seemingly unwilling or unable to act. That silence was not neutral. It was not simply the absence of words or action, it was complicity. When powerful institutions fail to respond in the face of mass suffering, they become part of the machinery that allows it to continue. Their passivity sent a message, loud and clear. The pain of the Burkinabe people was not urgent enough to merit intervention. Their lives were not valuable enough to force the world to act. Now, in a moment of awakening, as the people of Burkina Faso rise to reclaim their dignity and assert their right to self-determination, these same institutions reappear. They arrive not to offer solidarity or support, but to question, pressure, and intervene. The timing is no coincidence. It is only now, when the people have decided to reject foreign dependence and chart a new course, that their decisions are scrutinized, their leadership challenged, and their sovereignty undermined. Why did ECOWAS not mobilize its forces when terrorist groups claimed more territory than the state itself? Why did the United Nations not establish a strong peacekeeping presence when schools were overrun and teachers forced to flee? Why were international observers so muted when extremist violence forced millions from their homes? The people remember. The silence of those years has carved deep scars, not only on the land, but in the collective memory of the nation. And yet, when a new path is chosen, one rooted in the principle that Burkinabe solutions must come from Burkinabe hands, the world suddenly wakes up. Sanctions are proposed, diplomatic statements fly across headlines, and foreign delegations begin to flood in, all under the pretense of concern. But where was this concern when mothers buried their children under the open sky, when water sources were poisoned by violence, and when entire provinces became ungovernable? This selective attention reveals a painful truth. These institutions act not out of compassion for the people, but out of concern for a political order that benefits those in power. The people of Burkina Faso taking control of their destiny threatens that order. It challenges the idea that the region must be managed, governed, and stabilized by external actors. And so, their stand for independence is seen not as courage, but as disruption. This reality is not lost on the population. They are not blind to the patterns of global hypocrisy. They know that their suffering only became newsworthy when it affected international interests. They understand that their self-determination is being challenged, not because it fails to serve the people, but because it refuses to serve foreign agendas. And they are responding not with anger alone, but with clarity. This is why the people refuse to be lectured by those who abandon them. They will not accept being treated as problems to be solved by outsiders when those same outsiders disappeared when it mattered most. The neglect they experience has taught them a lesson. Liberation cannot be outsourced, and safety cannot be begged for. It must be built with their own hands on their own terms. The institutions now calling for dialogue and democracy must first confront their own record of neglect. Before they demand answers from a nation rising from its knees, they must answer for the years they turned their backs. True partnership begins with accountability, and until there is an honest reckoning with the silence that allowed suffering to thrive, their words will ring hollow to a people who have learned the hard way that survival means standing alone, if necessary. The time for selective concern is over. The people of Burkina Faso are not asking for permission to be free. They are simply choosing, at last, to be heard. Across the world, and particularly in Africa, words like democracy, human rights, and stability are repeated by global powers like sacred mantras. These terms are used to justify interventions, condemn governments, and influence internal politics. But beneath the surface of this carefully crafted language lies a deep hypocrisy, one that has become painfully clear to the people of Burkina Faso. These ideals, noble in theory, are too often deployed not to protect lives or promote justice, but to safeguard foreign interests, suppress independence, and maintain a grip on influence that has lasted for decades. In Burkina Faso's case, global powers remained largely passive for years while the country spiraled into insecurity. Communities were massacred, local economies collapsed, and terror groups gained ground. But the international community, despite all its talk of human rights and democratic values, stood by. There were no urgent missions, no pressuring of puppet regimes that had lost control. Why? Because during that period, the political order still served external agendas. The governments in place allowed foreign corporations to access resources, allowed military bases to operate without question, and followed instructions handed down from international financial institutions. In those moments, democracy was silent because control was intact. It is only when the people begin to rise, when they begin to question the legitimacy of imposed systems and demand their own voice, that these powerful actors suddenly rediscover their passion for stability. When a country like Burkina Faso seeks to restructure its political destiny, expel foreign military presence, or reclaim ownership over its resources, it is quickly labeled a threat. The language shifts: threat to democracy, military dictatorship, regional instability. These are the red flags that foreign media and international bodies wave to prepare the ground for condemnation, isolation, or even intervention. But the people of Burkina Faso see through this facade. They know that many of those preaching democracy today have supported dictatorships yesterday, as long as those regimes served foreign economic and strategic interests. The same voices that criticize grassroots leadership now were silent when elected leaders failed to protect citizens. The same institutions that claim to care about constitutional order ignored massacres, displacements, and lawlessness when it suited their interests. This is not the practice of democracy, it is the politics of control wrapped in the language of morality. Furthermore, the definition of democracy that global powers try to enforce is often shallow and selective. It reduces a people's will to ballot boxes and scheduled elections, while ignoring the deeper demands for sovereignty, dignity, and justice. A regime may be democratic by Western standards, yet completely detached from its people, unaccountable, and complicit in corruption and foreign exploitation. But if that regime allows foreign troops on its soil or signs away mining contracts, it is praised as a partner. Meanwhile, leadership that emerges from within, without permission, and dares to challenge the system is instantly labeled illegitimate. This contradiction is not lost on the Burkinabe people. They are aware that the same nations who bomb other countries in the name of human rights cannot pretend to be moral authorities. They have seen the destruction left behind by these double standards in Libya, in Mali, in the Sahel. They understand that stability, in the language of global powers, often means ensuring that the people do not rise too far, too fast, or too independently. Today, Burkina Faso stands at a critical crossroads. It is a nation that seeks to determine its own future not out of defiance, but out of necessity. It does not reject the principles of democracy or stability. It rejects the manipulation of those principles to serve external masters. It seeks a democracy rooted in its own culture and history, not one dictated by reports from foreign embassies or decisions made in conference rooms thousands of miles away. The call for true democracy is to respect the right of a people to choose their path, even if that path does not align with foreign preferences. To advocate for real stability is to invest in justice, security, and opportunity for the people, not just the preservation of foreign contracts or military access. Anything less is not democracy, it is domination. If the world wants to speak of values, it must first practice them. If it demands accountability from African nations, it must be willing to hold itself accountable for decades of exploitation, interference, and hypocrisy. Until then, the people of Burkina Faso will continue to walk their road, determined, aware, and unafraid, to expose the double standards that have for too long hidden behind empty words. The people of Burkina Faso stand at a decisive moment in history, a moment where the long-suppressed cry for sovereignty has finally broken free from the chains of silence and fear. It is a moment of clarity, when the painful reality of decades of foreign influence, manipulation, and exploitation has become impossible to ignore. This is not merely a political struggle. It is a profound battle for identity, dignity, and the right to determine one's own future, free from the dictates of external powers. In this struggle, sovereignty is not just a legal concept, it is the embodiment of the people's will, their collective spirit, and their refusal to be defined or controlled by anyone but themselves. For far too long, the people of Burkina Faso and much of Africa have been subjected to a world order that views them as pawns in a larger geopolitical game. From colonial times to the present day, foreign powers have sought to exploit the continent's vast resources without regard for the well-being or the will of its people. Burkina Faso has been no exception, whether through economic exploitation, military intervention, or political manipulation. External forces have had a hand in shaping the nation's fate. But now, the people of Burkina Faso have made it abundantly clear that they will no longer stand idly by as their sovereignty is eroded in the name of external interests. They will not allow foreign powers to dictate their decisions, nor will they allow their future to be shaped by anyone other than themselves. The desire for sovereignty is not a new sentiment in Burkina Faso. It is as old as the nation itself. From the time of its independence in 1960, the country has fought to assert its autonomy in the face of foreign domination. Yet the reality of post-independence, Africa has often been one where the fight for true sovereignty has been stifled by economic dependency, political instability, and the legacy of colonial structures. Burkina Faso, like many African nations, has been forced to navigate a world where its decisions are often influenced by international financial institutions, foreign governments, and multinational corporations that have little regard for the people's needs or desires. The people of Burkina Faso, however, are tired of being pawns in this larger game. They are tired of seeing their resources extracted, their labor exploited, and their voices silenced in the corridors of global power. The resistance that is unfolding today is not just against the forces of violence and terror that have plagued the nation. It is also a resistance against the foreign powers that have too often acted as enablers of those forces. The same institutions that claim to promote peace, democracy, and stability have often turned a blind eye when it suited their interests. They have supported governments that were complicit in the exploitation of the people, and when those governments fell, they were quick to try to reinstall order, an order that served their interests, not the interests of the people. Burkina Faso's resistance is thus not just a rejection of violence or foreign-backed puppet regimes. It is a refusal to accept a future in which foreign powers continue to hold the strings of power. Sovereignty is about more than simply the right to govern. It is about the right to shape one's own destiny. The people of Burkina Faso have shown, through their unwavering resolve, that they will not let anyone, be it a foreign government, a multinational corporation, or an international institution, dictate their future. They have rejected the idea that their country exists to serve the interests of others. They have chosen instead to reclaim their land, their resources, and their destiny for themselves. This is not a fight against progress or development. It is a fight for a model of progress that puts the needs and aspirations of the people first, not the agendas of foreign powers. The determination to reclaim sovereignty is also a commitment to resist any attempt to impose external solutions on the people of Burkina Faso. The country's history of foreign intervention is littered with examples of well-meaning policies that have been imposed from outside, only to leave the country more dependent, more divided, and more vulnerable to exploitation. The people of Burkina Faso have learned from these experiences. They know that true progress can only come when solutions are homegrown, when the people are given the space to determine their own priorities, and when leadership comes from within, not from foreign capitals. In this resistance, there is a deep sense of pride and unity. The people of Burkina Faso are reclaiming not just their land or their resources, but their sense of identity and agency. They are telling the world that they will no longer be defined by the decisions of distant powers. They are asserting their right to be the architects of their own future, to decide how they will live, what they will produce, and how they will govern themselves. This is a fight for dignity, for freedom, and for the right to choose one's own path. As the struggle for sovereignty continues, it is crucial that the international community listens. It is essential that foreign powers understand that true peace and stability can only be achieved when the people of Burkina Faso are allowed to determine their own future. External interventions that seek to impose solutions from above will only deepen the sense of alienation and resistance. Only by respecting the sovereignty of the Burkinabe people can lasting peace and prosperity be achieved. In the end, this is not just a struggle for Burkina Faso. It is a struggle for all people who have been denied the right to shape their own destiny. It is a reminder that sovereignty is not a gift to be granted by external powers. It is a right that belongs to the people, and it is a right that no one can take away. The people of Burkina Faso are determined to defend this right, and in doing so, they are sending a powerful message to the world. Sovereignty, resistance, and self-determination are the foundation of any true nation. In the face of immense external pressure, growing internal challenges, and the ever-present threat of intervention, the silence from Burkina Faso's leadership is a powerful message in itself. This silence is often misinterpreted by outsiders as weakness, passivity, or indecision, but for the people of Burkina Faso, it is anything but. It is a deliberate, calculated decision that speaks to a deep well of resilience, strategy, and inner strength. It is the calm before the storm, the pause that allows for reflection and action, and a clear refusal to be rushed or coerced into decisions that are not in the best interests of the nation. Silence, in the context of the current political moment, is not an absence of will or purpose. It is a statement of defiance. It is a refusal to be drawn into hasty, ill-thought-out responses dictated by outside forces. In a world that often demands immediate reactions and quick fixes, the leadership of Burkina Faso has chosen instead to carefully navigate the storm. It is a sign that the people are not desperate for approval from distant powers, nor are they willing to compromise their sovereignty or dignity in the face of international scrutiny. The silence is their way of saying that their course will not be dictated by the shifting winds of foreign politics, but by their own will and determination. The leadership's silence also serves as a reminder that not all struggles are fought with loud declarations and aggressive posturing. Sometimes the most powerful acts of resistance are those that are silent, thoughtful, and deliberate. In a world where media cycles demand constant drama, constant noise, and constant visibility, Burkina Faso's choice to remain composed and measured in the face of external pressure is a calculated decision to assert their own narrative, free from external manipulation. They know that every word spoken, every action taken can be twisted, misconstrued, or used against them. By remaining silent, they ensure that they are not playing into the hands of those who seek to undermine their resolve. They are writing their own story on their own terms. In moments of crisis, leaders often feel the weight of expectation to act swiftly, to offer reassurance, and to provide answers. But not all situations call for immediate responses. Sometimes the wisest course is to observe, analyze, and wait for the right moment to act. The leadership of Burkina Faso understands that true strength lies not in reacting to every external pressure, but in remaining steadfast and resolute, even when the world is watching. This silence is a demonstration of the country's inner strength, the strength to stay grounded in the face of uncertainty, the strength to hold their ground against external forces that would prefer them to bend or break. The decision to remain silent also reflects the confidence of the people. They are not operating from a place of fear or insecurity. Rather, they are acting from a place of deep conviction. The people of Burkina Faso know who they are and what they stand for. They understand their history, their culture, and their right to self-determination. This sense of identity is not something that can be easily shaken by outside forces. The silence is a testament to the fact that they are not seeking validation or permission from foreign governments or institutions. They are moving forward on their own terms, not because they have to, but because they believe it is the right thing to do. For those watching from outside, the silence may seem unsettling. In a world where instant communication and quick decisions are the norm, the quiet resolve of Burkina Faso's leadership is difficult to understand. But the silence in reality is a powerful weapon. It allows the leadership to focus on long-term goals, to carefully consider the consequences of their actions, and to avoid being dragged into hasty decisions that could compromise the nation's sovereignty. In this silence, there is clarity, a clarity that comes from the knowledge that true strength lies not in the volume of one's voice, but in the certainty of one's convictions. In the face of the challenges Burkina Faso faces, terrorism, internal divisions, external pressure, the decision to remain silent is also a form of self-protection. Every nation that seeks to chart its own course faces obstacles, and those obstacles often come in the form of international actors who are eager to influence the outcome. By staying silent, Burkina Faso's leadership denies those external actors the satisfaction of knowing they can provoke a reaction. Instead, the country remains focused on its own priorities, on what is best for its citizens, and on the long-term vision for a sovereign, independent nation. The silence is not a retreat, it is a strategy. It is a way to ensure that the country's leadership remains centered and unmoved by external noise. It is a recognition that some things cannot be rushed, and that the people's journey toward self-determination is not a race to be won in a matter of days or weeks, but a slow, deliberate process that requires patience, resilience, and courage. By remaining silent, Burkina Faso's leadership is signaling that they are not afraid of the long road ahead, and they are not afraid to face the consequences of their choices. At the heart of this silence lies a deep, unspoken confidence, a confidence in their ability to rise above the challenges before them and to lead their people with strength, wisdom, and determination. This silence is not weakness. It is the calmness of a people who know their power and are not afraid to wield it when the time is right. It is a silence that speaks louder than any words because it reflects the unwavering conviction of a nation that will not be swayed by foreign pressures, but will stand firm in the pursuit of its own future. The unfolding events in Burkina Faso will resonate far beyond the present moment, for history has a way of judging the decisions made today and placing them in the context of justice, morality, and the will of the people. As the nation struggles to assert its right to self-determination, future generations will look back on this period with keen eyes, and they will remember the actions, or lack thereof, taken by those who had the power to influence the outcome. The question that will echo through the annals of history is this: who stood with the people and who stood against them under the guise of international concern? Those who supported the will of the people will be remembered as allies in the fight for freedom and justice. But those who sought to suppress this movement will be remembered not for their so-called concern for peace or democracy, but for their role in perpetuating the structures of exploitation, inequality, and foreign domination. In the years to come, when historians look back at the global response to the people's struggle for sovereignty, they will see a stark contrast. They will see one group of nations, those who recognized and supported the legitimate aspirations of the Burkinabe people, and another group of actors who cloaked their interests in the language of stability, democracy, and human rights, while seeking to maintain control and influence over a sovereign nation. This distinction will not be lost on future generations, who will have access to the full record of what transpired in this pivotal period. They will see who genuinely supported self-determination and who used the rhetoric of international concern to mask a desire for continued power and control. For the people of Burkina Faso, the battle is not just about reclaiming their sovereignty in the present. It is about securing their place in the history books as a nation that rose up to reclaim its dignity, its rights, and its future. They understand that their struggle is part of a larger story, a story that stretches beyond their borders, beyond their generation, and into the hearts of every person who has ever fought for justice. The actions taken now will not just affect the immediate future, they will echo through time, shaping the way future generations perceive the country's fight for freedom and independence. The children of today will grow up knowing whether their parents' struggle was validated or undermined by external forces, and they will draw lessons from the choices made in this critical moment. The international community is often quick to claim concern for human rights and democracy, yet this concern frequently evaporates when those ideals clash with broader geopolitical goals. Burkina Faso's sovereignty is being questioned and challenged not because of any intrinsic failure of its people or leadership, but because it threatens the established order of global power. Those who claim to care for the people of Burkina Faso must first prove that their commitment to democracy and human rights is not conditional upon maintaining a status quo that benefits foreign interests. The suppression of Burkina Faso's aspirations by external actors under the pretense of international concern will not stand the test of time. Future generations will see through the thin veil of rhetoric and recognize the hypocrisy behind many international interventions in Africa. One of the most enduring legacies of the colonial era has been the imposition of foreign interests on African nations. The structures of global power that emerged in the aftermath of colonialism often served to keep former colonies dependent on external powers, both economically and politically. The consequences of this dependency are still felt today, as many African nations continue to face challenges in asserting their sovereignty and independence in a world where global powers continue to assert influence. Burkina Faso's present struggle to reclaim its sovereignty is, in many ways, a continuation of this historical fight. That future generations will understand that the choices made now by both Burkina Faso and the international community are part of this broader historical trajectory. In time, the world will reflect on the responses of international bodies like the United Nations, ECOWAS, and Western powers, and they will ask the critical questions. Did these entities stand with the people of Burkina Faso in their fight for self-determination, or did they prioritize the interests of foreign governments and multinational corporations? Did they recognize the right of the people to choose their own leaders, chart their own course, and determine their own future? Or did they side with the status quo, seeking to impose external will under the guise of democracy and stability? These are the questions that future generations will grapple with, and the answers will determine how the actions of today are remembered. The accountability of the international community will not be measured by the speed with which they issue sanctions or the number of press releases they produce, but by the consistency of their actions in aligning with the true interests of the people. Those who stood on the side of the Burkinabe people, who recognized their right to self-determination, to choose their own political future, and to reject foreign domination, will be seen as allies in the broader fight for global justice. They will be remembered for standing with the people when it mattered most, but those who sought to suppress these aspirations, those who imposed sanctions, issued threats, or applied pressure to maintain external control, will be judged harshly as those who betrayed their own stated ideals in favor of preserving the power structures that perpetuate inequality and exploitation. In the years to come, the actions of the current global powers will be viewed through the lens of historical accountability. Future generations will not only remember who acted to preserve Burkina Faso's sovereignty, but will also remember who tried to stifle it. They will remember those who claim to protect democracy while undermining the very principle that defines it, the right of the people to determine their own future. History will judge not by the words spoken, but by the actions taken, and by the legacy of those choices for the generations that follow.